Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Manchester Cathedral and welcome to the event Robots versus Loneliness on behalf of the Lincoln Theological Institute, which is based at the University of Manchester, and on also behalf of the ESRC Festival of Social Science, which is what this event is hosted and organised as part of. We welcome you to the Cathedral, where we're going to talk tonight about sort of what impact robots are having on how we think about loneliness, how we think about sociality and what it is to be human. We have a panel of amazing speakers who are going to talk about different aspects of robots and different aspects of loneliness. I'll come back to you guys in just a second. Just before I tell you a little bit more about the kind of things we'll be talking about in the event, I just want to say a little bit about the LTI. The Lincoln Theological Institute is based at the University of Manchester. This year it's 21. We've been doing 21 years of research into religion and society. Even though religion isn't one of the main topics we'll be focusing on today, it's one of the things that's, we're here in the cathedral. It's quite an important building. It's quite important that we're here in the cathedral thinking about robots and loneliness. And so to say a little bit more about why it's important that we're here in the cathedral, I'll hand over briefly to David Holgate to welcome you to the cathedral.
Thank you. Thanks, Scott. Thank you. Can I just say that I'm delighted to have this event here. I think there's quite an exciting program through the week. I was saying to Professor Peter Scott that I was really pleased to be able to have a topic other than remembrance on in this week. I know that the 100th anniversary of the end of the First World War is incredibly socially important, but it's not the only thing happening in our society. And so the ESR Festival, the Social Science Festival in Manchester is really important and raising really important issues, I mean, such as the impact of Brexit on Salford, for example. But tonight it's really, really special to be able to be considering what impact information technology, artificial intelligence, and robotics are going to have on our future. And I can just say on behalf of the church that we are really interested in this. Right in central London at Church House, there are people putting on lots of events like this and finding that there's an incredible amount of interest in this. So it's great to have Scott as our postdoc researcher focusing on this area, and I'm delighted to welcome our guests. I know Scott's going to introduce you in a moment, but thank you for being here tonight, and we look forward to learning a lot and enjoying a little charm from Pepper. Oh, by the way, loos and facilities are just up the stairs to your right and through the door if you need it. And if you'd like to have a drink, soft or wine, it's available on the side, either during or afterwards.
Thank you, David. Okay, so we're talking about robots and loneliness tonight. Now, this is the subject of my research, and this is why I've put together this event. My current project that I'm doing at the Lincoln Theological Institute looks at different ways that we can think about love with machines. And I look at the religious ideas about love, how we think about love as making us humans, and whether robots like Pepper over here can ever participate in these kinds of loving relationships. And loneliness is one of the ways we can think about how we love one another as a sort of society, how we can care for one another, and that's one of the themes that we're going to be bringing up today. So this is my own background and how I approach this topic. Social robots are kind of talked about a lot at the moment. They're a big trend in robotics. They're often talked about, but people don't really know fully what they necessarily are. In short, social robots are things like Pepper, who's being remarkably quiet at the moment. She's really, really talkative, or he, she, or it is really talkative. And if you haven't had the chance to meet Pepper already, I do encourage you after the discussion to have a conversation, I guess, with Pepper. Social robots are machines, robots that can look human-like. They're designed to interact and engage with humans in some way. One of the ways we can think about social robots is things like Alexa, Siri, Cortana, Google Assistant, these kind of chatbots that you're interacting with in a social way. With these chatbots, it tends to be that you're giving a communication or a command to the machine that it then follows, and it's really frustrating if it doesn't follow it. But with other kinds of social robots, there's more of an emphasis on having a two-way conversation with it. Can it understand you? Can it engage with you in a meaningful and significant way? And if we think about that question, that helps us think about what we understand when it comes to loneliness and why it's quite a controversial topic to think about whether robots can aid or tackle loneliness in any way. So on the one hand, we have these robots that might be human-like. They might look like humans. They might do human things. They might look like us. We can say they're humanoid, perhaps. And on the other hand, we have the fact that the robot is a machine. It's not flesh and blood. It's not a person in the same way that we think about fellow humans. So it's this kind of tension that it sits at. It looks like us and it talks to us in a sort of human-like way, but it's not quite enough to say that it is a full human. And this is the source of a lot of our tensions and ambiguities. The other thing we're talking about today is loneliness. So we're talking about robots on the one hand and how social robots fit into this kind of context. We're also thinking about loneliness in a social context as well. Why loneliness? Well, on the one hand, we have a lot of studies at the moment that are saying how it's not just an aging population concern, the idea of loneliness. A lot of robots in Japan and elsewhere in the world are being developed to provide company to and sort of care for an aging population. At the same time, though, we have reports that say that younger generations in the UK, 16 to 24-year-olds, are among the loneliest in society. So people are sort of being disconnected from one another in one way or another. The significance of this is marked by other reports by people like Mind UK, a charity that looks at mental health, and they say that loneliness is linked to depression and anxiety. So it's not just that you have nowhere to go on a Saturday afternoon. It's not just a sort of trivial aspect of loneliness. It's how it impacts how you see yourself as a person, how you interact with other people. Not only is it linked to health concerns, but other groups have identified that loneliness is a looming major public health concern. It's a big issue that we need to tackle and we need to think about more sooner rather than later. And that's why people like, or robots like Pepper are an interesting way to sort of tap into that conversation in technological terms. One way that the government at the moment are thinking about combating loneliness or tackling loneliness is having sort of social prescribing from doctors. Can doctors prescribe social activities or social engagement as a way of kind of combating loneliness? That's one suggestion that's coming out of Theresa May's government at the moment. Robots are another suggestion that's coming out of worldwide, and we're going to hear from a range of speakers as to how we can think about that. So these are the questions that I posed to you, sort of quite broad, big questions, deliberately so we can have a nice big conversation about them. We're going to hear from each of our speakers about different aspects of robots and different aspects of loneliness. And then once we've heard from each of them and their research backgrounds, we'll then open the floor for a more interactive conversation, and you'll have a chance to ask questions as well. We want this to be an interactive, discursive event. We want you to get a lot from it. We want it to be stimulating and engaging for you. Once we've had a conversation, we've got an hour and a half. After that time, you can then come out and chat to our speakers, and also come and meet Pepper if you haven't had a chance already. If you're not quite brave enough to come out and hold the microphone, we do have a hashtag throughout the evening. Feel free to tweet any questions or comments you have, and I'll be reading those out as well. So the hashtag is robots versus loneliness. Any questions that you have, we'll sort of pass the mic around, and we'll have via Twitter as well. So without further ado, let me introduce our panel. First of all, we have Professor Irena Papadopoulos from Middlesex University. Irena is working on a project at the moment looking at care robots in the context of elderly, care homes and elderly context. So she'll be talking about her research on that side of how we think about robots and loneliness. Next, we have Dr. Beth Singler, who is Junior Research Fellow at Homerton College in Cambridge. And she's also a researcher, a postdoc with the Leverhulme Centre for the Future of Intelligence. It's a lot of words there, and it's a lot to get right. But Beth is going to be talking to us about her research into robots and companionship, and she's going to be presenting part of her film that's online, Friend in the Machine, and talking about how we can interact with robots. Next up, we have James Young. James has presented and researched documentaries for BBC Three on sex robots. So James will be giving us an insight into robots, social robots, and how they can tackle partnership issues, loneliness in a different, more kind of intimate context. And then finally, we have Dr. Dave Cameron from the University of Sheffield. Dave is a specialist in human-computer interaction and the psychology of it. And Dave will be talking to us about how children in particular engage with robots and how we look at robots from a developmental psychological perspective. So that's our panel. We have a range of different ways that we can think about robots. This is only scratching the surface of how we think about robots and loneliness, but it's a good way to cast a net wide and show the range of different things that we can think about. So without further ado, I'll now pass over to Irena to kick us off with our thinking about robots and loneliness. Thank you very much.
Well, Good evening, everybody, and thank you very much, Scott, for inviting me to this important event, and which I hope is going to generate a lot of discussion. So my brief was to talk about older people, robots, and loneliness. So I'm going to introduce a few topics, and hopefully, obviously, we only have very short, I've been given 10 minutes to talk to you, so it's only about brief introduction, so please do ask me as many questions as you like afterwards. So let's move on to the next one. So we need to have a debate. So let's have some facts first of all. I thought you might like to see this slide. As you can see that in 2016, the Office of National Statistics reported that the UK has 65.5 million people. 500,000 of them are over the age of 90. 15,000 of them are age 100, and out of that, 1,000 people are over 105. So there are 11 million adults who are 65 years old and above. And you know, the changing demographic is not just something that is happening in the UK. Everywhere in the world, many countries in the world, people are growing older. And as you can see, some other figures there, I just particularly wanted to mention Japan, that has 127 million, but 65,000 of them are over 100 years old. So, another important, I think, statistic is that 1.4 million people living in England, not in the UK, over 50 report that they are lonely very often. And this is, the projection is that by 2030, there'll be over 2 million people who are going to be in that position. So, this is something quite important and significant, and I wanted to mention it because growing old requires, obviously, a lot of us will require care and support from other people, and formal and informal carers are very, very important in terms of alleviating the loneliness that comes with old age. So just a few reasons really why informal carers, I'm sure this is not a new thing to you. You probably all know that as families are becoming smaller and smaller, there are fewer people that are around to care for older people. Their relatives, a lot of people move away from, family members move away. My family, I have sisters and brothers all over the world. So, my parents, unfortunately, because of the circumstances, they didn't have their children near them to care for them. Obviously, friends grow old together with us, and it's natural that they will also maybe require support and care, and maybe some of them will die. And widowhood is another reason. Former carers, we all know that we have a major problem in terms of recruiting and retaining staff to care for older people. We have reduced budgets, the costs are going up, and of course we have Brexit. Well, everybody knows that there is a bit of an exodus at the moment from people who come from the European Union who work in this field. So this information comes from a BBC recent report, and has reported what is loneliness. Loneliness is feeling disconnected, feeling left out, feeling sad, nobody to talk to. And as Scott mentioned, is not something that affects only the older people, it affects everybody. At the moment, actually the younger population, the 24 to a year, forget the range, but the figures are almost the same. There are a number of causes that are mentioned in that report, as you can see, from physical health to mental health to changes in society and social media, of course. I don't know whether that is something that we might want to talk about later. Loneliness is bad for our health. I'm sure you will agree. We all sort of instinctively know that. A lot of people who are lonely, as again Scott mentioned, may be feeling sad. It affects the way that they look after themselves, and sadness and depression does affect. And we do have a lot of research, and more is piling up to indicate the link between loneliness, mental health, physical health, spiritual health, cognitive health, and how that impacts on our well-being. I mention well-being because philosophers over the years and millennia have spoken about well-being and happiness as the chief human good. That means the main purpose of life, really. What is our main purpose of life? To feel good and to feel happy. And again, and for that reason, we have a moral obligation to look into how we can alleviate loneliness. This picture comes from a report from Age UK, again, a very recently published report, and they suggested that solutions to loneliness should be personalized, focused on social activities, and we should be creating welcoming neighborhoods. Very, very good ambitions, very good suggestions and recommendations. Not so easy to always achieve. I have added there poverty because I think poverty is a major cause of loneliness, and we need to think about how we can deal with that too. So we need some new solutions. So I'd say bring in the robots. So this is why we're discussing about the robots. And this is me with pepper. We have pepper and salt at my university, and I'm involved in a project I will just briefly mention. So innovative solutions such as using humanoid socially assistive robots is not the cup of tea of everybody. And some people think that they are scared and they have a lot of fears in relation to the robots that are coming, and may also consider that having robots to care for our older people is not such an ethical thing to do. This is a picture from a discussion that on a BBC News, they were discussing the stories that were coming out of newspapers that day. And one of them was about elderly will be cared for by robots. And unfortunately, the two people who were discussing were sensationalizing the topic. They talked, oh, we're very scared. Old people, this is a dangerous way of going down the road in caring for the elderly, and only human beings can care, and things like that. Sensationalism doesn't help. We really need to be engaging and in a sensible and informed discussion, and that's why we're here tonight, in order to harness the potential that technology, especially artificial intelligence technology, can offer. So enough of that. In fact, there is quite a bit of research, and it is growing in terms of humanoid socially assistive robots in working with humans and older people as well. And the evidence is that it is quite positive at the moment. So although they do, you know, there is a need for better research, and this is recognized. So although robots will not be the panacea for addressing loneliness and well-being, I think to give up to fear and to not to investigate and not to engage with all the possibilities that the AI could offer is, in my view, unethical in itself. So the project that I'm involved with is called Caresses, and it is a European-Japanese collaboration. These are the partners. It's a number of universities coordinated in Europe by the University of Genova in Italy. And we're also working with a group of companies that runs many care homes. The name is Advinia, up and down the country. And we have SoftBank Robotics, which produces Pepper, as one of our partners. So how is our project different from other projects? Our project is attempting to develop the first culturally competent robot to care for the elderly. And this is really where I come from, because I'm not an AI person, I'm not a robotics engineer, I'm just a nurse who worked for 30 years developing cultural competent approaches to caring from human healthcare workers to human patients. So now I had to think very hard and had to work to convert all of that kind of knowledge and experience into what should go into a robot to achieve that. We can talk about that later if you like. So the robot obviously is autonomous and can learn, moves independently. It has, in our project, we have 4 main areas of work. This is companionship, health promotion, care, safety, and prevention. They are all connected and they all contribute towards the alleviation of loneliness. But I have sort of highlighted the companionship more because that is the closest that we've been talking about. So communicating through speech and gestures, it will do. Providing entertainment, for example, reading aloud or getting music or films and etc. from on TV and so forth. Connecting people, just instead of an older person having to find out the number and who to ring and how to ring, etc. You can just give a command to the robot and it will just get the person that you want to speak to in a few seconds. Reminiscing, which is very good for cognitive functions and so forth, and doing all of this in a culturally appropriate way and in a culturally sensitive way, because the robot will know about the person's cultural background and cultural identity, and will, through the models and the content that we have put into our robot, will be able to respond and also act in a way that it is appropriate and hopefully acceptable. So that's all I have time to talk to you about, but please ask me questions afterwards. I hope you do. So thank you very much for your listening to me.
Hello, as Scott said, I am the Junior Research Fellow in Artificial Intelligence at Homerton College, Cambridge, also an Associate Research Fellow at the Leverhulme Centre for the Future of Intelligence, also in Cambridge. Lots of titles. But basically, what that means is I think about what you, as in the general public, people, think about machines that might think. It took me a while to come up with that logline, but I do this in a variety of ways. As an anthropologist, I want to be in the places, in the situations where people are having a conversation about artificial intelligence intelligence and robots. So some examples here, some things you might recognize. I do get paid to read science fiction, watch science fiction, pay attention to those sorts of things. That's a particularly wonderful part of my job. I also go to places like the robot museum, the robot exhibition at the Science Museum when that was on, to see how people were interacting with the exhibits and seeing how they were reacting. I do a lot of my research online as a digital ethnographer, listening to how people are describing artificial intelligence and robots, what kind of fear reactions or expectations they might be having. And sometimes I do get to go to places like Japan and see how they are conceiving of robots and AI in a way that might be different to how we conceive of them. And as a part of paying attention to these conversations, I also wanted to provoke discussion and debate and enable spaces for where that can happen. So events like this are a particularly good example of that kind of public engagement. But what I've also been doing is making a series of short films on the future of AI and humanity. There's 4 planned. We have 3 produced already, and the 4th is currently in production. Pain in the Machine, the first film, considered a provocative question of could and should robots feel pain, partly because it was a collaboration with a pain expert at Cambridge, and this was a way of bringing our 2 areas of expertise together. That film did quite well. We won an award for it last year. The second film, which I'm going to show you a clip of in a minute, and I'll introduce it a bit further then, is Friend in the Machine, considering questions around companionship with robots, which is relevant to this evening. I love the transitions you've got on this slide. I never bother with anything quite so fancy, but Good in the Machine came out in July. That's around questions of AI ethics. How do we create good AI, and how do we use AI in a good and ethical way? Big questions. And finally, Ghost in the Machine, in production at the moment, as I say, is considering questions around consciousness. We're going to do this in 14 minutes because we're really ambitious. We can settle the question of consciousness in artificial intelligence in 14 minutes. No, we will have a discussion and debate in the film. Friend in the Machine. So the kinds of questions we were thinking about when we were developing this short film, I worked with 2 filmmakers in Cambridge for a company called Dragon Light Films, just to give them a big up. Questions like, can a machine be a substitute for a human companion? Would a perfect friend actually be an imperfect friend? That actually, if you could code someone to be the most perfect friend, would that actually not be a relationship that worked particularly well? Are we lonely enough to consider relationships with machines? The question of loneliness, obviously pertinent to this evening, that actually we see increasing amounts of loneliness. Have we reached a tipping point that actually we have to look for other sources of social interaction? What's the real nature of companionship itself? Technological solutions to social problems, like the aging population, as just mentioned by Irena. Is the simulation of friendship actually a deceit or a good enough option for those who want it? If some people prefer not to interact with humans, should we judge? I've just spent 4 hours this morning on a train. I'm sorry, I didn't really speak to many humans. I looked at my phone a lot, and I probably wasn't the only one. We don't necessarily have to interact with human beings all the time. And is there harm in robot companionship? Will we lose something if we don't have interactions with humans, if we choose to interact with robotic companions instead? These are various big questions, and the way we approached it, you'll see in the film, is to have a combination of expert voices, pop cultural references. I'm a big science fiction geek, so there's lots of science fiction clips in there, and also a fictional narrative of an old lady who's given a robot for a particular purpose to stop her loneliness. And off the back of the films, we've also been presenting people with the option to fill in a survey. This is an answer from the Friend in the Machine survey, question 10. Do you think that building relationships with robots in the future could be harmful to humans in any way? And I don't know how clear that is for people at the back, but the largest result, this is not a huge sample size, but the largest result is yes, very harmful. So there's some concern there, and that's partly what I wanted to do with these films, is actually to get into the conversation and find out what people are saying. And there's also opportunities in the survey to provide qualitative, long-form responses, so people can write pretty much whatever they want for as long as they want. Some people did write rather long essays. But here's some examples from the Friend in the Machine survey. So yes, about the question of harm, but the extent of the harm would be determined by the people who equip the technology with different abilities of AI and the way in which users of the technology put that robot to use. So it's not about the robot intrinsically causing harm, it's about what we choose to do with it. The only risk, the second person says, I can guess, is losing touch with reality and interactions with real human beings, a distinction there between real and not real, but saying that this comes in a longer history of our intentional alienation from others through technology like video games, virtual reality. Or they mention prostitution or pornography, not normal sex service, which is a really interesting way to put not normal sex service, but I get the point. And a third person, loss of social skills and communication with other people, but I think this is a fairly harmless prospect. Society does shift in the wake of new developments. For children, it could be valuable developing language, learning new things parents cannot teach at home, and there's a lot of work being done in the field of developing educational AI systems. I was talking to a company from China not so long ago that they're working on a modular-based machine learning system that you wouldn't necessarily need a teacher for, and that there's concerns with that development as well. But there's various different spaces in which artificial intelligence and companionship will express that isn't just sort of the classical being a friend with a robot. So I'm going to show you, hopefully, 7 minutes of Friend in the Machine. So Friend in the Machine is about 12 minutes long. We're going to show you the last 7 minutes so I can stick to time. Please do go watch this online, go see the other films and fill out the survey if you so feel inclined.
To be deprived of companionship is, for almost everyone, a very great deprivation indeed. That's presumably why solitary confinement is one of the worst punishments that people can be subjected to. Because being with other people, congenial other people, is a fundamental good in human life.
But the line that has not been crossed yet is drones making lethal decisions.
Ow. Stupid thing. Oh! Sorry, Harry. Thanks. Come on, then. You lead the way.
If you talk about romantic relationships with robots, with companions, whether robotic or not, there's a great interest in that topic. And again, I understand it. It's in our nature. Digital agents or robots cannot be substitutes for human beings. They are not sentient beings. They can fool you in believing that they like you or even love you, but they are just tricking you, I'm afraid. They have been programmed to do so, to look in your eyes very deeply and say, I love you so much. But they don't mean it. They don't mean it. You might mean it.
I find your slack-jawed stare very attractive. Fill up, J. Fry.
Did you hear that? She likes me. Well, duh. She's programmed to like you.
We know neuroscientifically that the fundamental default position of every healthy human brain is to concern itself with only one thing, which is who do I love and who loves me. In other words, a human is defined by their social being. And I don't think we need to change that.
Hello, madam. Are you having a lovely day? I have a delivery for you. Madam? Thanks. Have a lovely day.
So I believe there's a profound difference between this kind of relationship we can have with a human being and the kind of relationship we can have with a machine. So this is a machine, it's an it.
Hello.
But it feels as though I'm engaging with another person.
Hi.
But it's simulated. The argument comes that for somebody who is isolated and alone, a simulated relationship of friendship is better than no relationship at all.
Do you have a name?
Yes. Ava.
So technology is being promoted as a substitute because of failures in our solidarity, our human concern for one another.
Hi, I'm Buddy.
What is the difference between a person made out of meat, a machine which is a biological machine like a human body, and a machine which is made out of silicon? And from a religious and theological perspective, and particularly in the Christian perspective, If relationality is the heart of what it means to be human, then this is a profoundly important and precious part of our humanity, and we need to protect it.
Picking your elderly mother out of bed in the morning because she can't stand up on her own, that is a task that needs to be done. And talking to your mother, caring for your mother, they're actually fundamentally different things. But I think we need to be careful not to delegate certain things to robots that we should be doing ourselves.
We're capable of all sorts of different relationships, relationships to pets, relationships to people in different ways. And I think that robots just fall into maybe a new category of that.
The fundamental question that we need to be asking is, what kind of society do we want to build for the future? Do we want a society in which technological simulations of human relationships dominate everywhere we live? Or do we want a society which says, actually, we think human interaction is so important that we're going to make sure that any technology that is introduced in a way which is going to strengthen and deepen and protect human relationships, but not used in a way which will threaten or in any way replace human relationships?
Excellent move. Would you like a cup of tea while you consider your next move?
Come on, then. Where are you going? There you go. See you later.
Okay, so that was Beth's film there, and there'll be plenty of chance to ask questions about that to Beth and also to the rest of the panel. I think it raised a lot of questions that are common across all the different things that people are talking about with robots and loneliness, kind of themes across social robots. So with that, I'll hand over next to our next speaker, who is James Young, if this is going to work. Yes, and James is joining us over from the BBC. Are you okay with it?
Yeah. Hi. So a lot of Beth's work is really kind of brought to a more real place with what happens when you start to try and embody technology. And if you think about sex robots as a new embodiment that's being challenged, I don't know why I'm going to start on sex robots. But yeah, all of those issues basically become much more serious when you imagine a robot that could have all of the abilities that she's described, but in sort of a complete package. And we covered this in a couple of documentaries, including this one is Can Robots Love Us?, where you can see how Bill interacts with Pepper. And it's a clunky experience in a way, because the technology is not really there for all of our hopes and dreams to be working, in my experience. And some of the tasks can be done, some cannot. So it's like the physical things, like lifting the mum out of bed, potentially may be done by robots. And in some ways, we don't really know how it's going to go yet, and people are researching ways to try and provide kind of unforeseen ways of dealing with things. For example, like teleoperated robots. You could have someone possibly doing like a shift work and operating robots around someone's home. So it's like the technology and the AI is not so great to navigate someone's home and take them around and do all these things, but potentially there could be like a new industry, but around caring for people through other methods. And in this documentary as well, I've covered things to do with AI that's not particularly in a complete package, but where you could create a chatbot that would but address some concerns that you have as a person. It's kind of like an acute example of how a robot might deal with our loneliness in a sort of chatbot kind of way. And additionally, there's other ways that technology could deal with things and to do with our problems that we can't really face or potentially achieve as good as a human being. And what I'm describing is the fact that in the documentary, Rochelle here tries a mental health kind of therapy in VR. So she has a phobia of traveling on the tube trains in London, and basically hadn't been on one for 2.5 years. And we took her to get this novel therapy in London, and she had this headset that covered her eyes and showed her the experience of going down underground and experiencing that in a kind of controlled situation. And as much as you could have a therapist kind of turning off the lights and describing to you the situation, technology is providing new ways to kind of immerse people into things and in a controlled way and maybe a safe way. So it's kind of interesting to see that technology could potentially do more than we could possibly do for each other. That's kind of what she saw in a way. So yeah, it's the thing that really stood out and why we made a second film was the interest in sex robots. It seems like as soon as we've begun talking about them, it's become a thing in a weird way. And in the film, if you watch, people are trying to create robots that are sex dolls but include artificial intelligence and have language processing, and they learn your behaviors and try and understand, for example, your sexual preferences and what you want, when you want it. Let me go. I'm going to leave those there and head back up to sit down, because I've made lots of notes. So yeah, in the documentary, we kind of explored all these parts, the components of what a robot might do for your loneliness, and it kind of, in the sexual aspect, they do seem kind of basic. These robots with AI in them are kind of just barely responding to their own names that they have. When you say Samantha, get sexy is the phrase that activates her sexual mode away from her family companion mode. If you can imagine having a sex robot sitting in your lounge and just, I don't know, interacting with your children, whilst you know that it's got this strange purpose and this hypersexualized body for what you want to do with it later. It's kind of strange. But the technology now is, to me, kind of like the first mobile phone, in that it was really kind of rubbish and you couldn't use it for very long and it didn't do a lot. And people thought, why do I need that technology in my life? Why can't I just talk to someone and interact with them normally or at another time when things are more chilled out? And why do I need to shortcut things by having a constantly connected miniature computer that does everything all the time? And kind of potentially, people would say that it detracts and distracts from things that are more human. So we might see in the future, although the robots seem really basic now, they're kind of silicon shells that don't really move a lot. Some people are trying to make it move in specific ways. But there's not this complete humanoid experience that we see in science fiction that could potentially arrive if people find the budget, basically, which is kind of, we'll just have to see how it goes in time. But a lot of what Beth was saying about whether a human, if people perceive a human to be negatively affected by technology and reducing socialization and stuff like that, it's to bring a humanoid form and a sex robot into the equation. It kind of makes you question how people are going to behave with one another. And like in the film, we go to Japan and we explore the research behind consciousness and what people perceive the code of robots to kind of show a human experience. And we kind of talk on the way to meet these professors about like the Japanese population and people that are isolated playing video games and having virtual girlfriends on their mobile phones. And so what would be the step if we then bring physical embodied robots into the equation? Like, we don't really know what it's going to do. But we're in this annoying place where everything's so kind of, it's a precursor to everything that we don't fully understand what it's going to be like. And when you're dealing with people, you can't just be like, okay, let's get 1 million people to just have sex with robots now and then see how they get messed up or not. It's kind of not ethical. The robots themselves, I just find it really interesting to think about the questions around what it would be like. So if you have a robot companion, how does it work in terms of, will you be satisfied physically in terms of being a biological human being that's evolved for millions and millions of years? I'm just pausing on creationism for a second because we're in a church. But anyway, so we've got these very acute mechanisms that allow us to like smell each other and feel each other and touch each other. If we kind of streamline the experience to become, it's almost more intellectual if we're kind of projecting things onto robots to an extent, because they're not going to be as complicated as us, because we're just inventing them now at this stage. And what does streamlining do for us psychologically and also physically? What we want from the robot? Is it just not going to be ever the same, or will we be able to think that this is enough because it allows us to do other things with our time? Do we want to end up just having this kind of partnership with a piece of technology and that allowing us to learn and be better people, or will it just detract from our ability to understand each other? Like, what does a challenging relationship teach you as a person? And these all are questions that basically I'd love to get talking about because it's so fascinating. I think I'll hand over.
Great. Well, thank you, James. We've had a lot of like grand, big ideas so far. My work's very sort of procedural, so please bear with me on it. So I'm I'm a lecturer now, a lecturer in human-computer interaction at the Information School. For a few years previous, I was working at Sheffield Robotics, which is part of the Sheffield University and the University of Hallam, Sheffield Hallam University. And I studied robotics. Specifically, I work with all of these people, or these machines, depending on how we're going to look at these today. So we have, how many have I got here? I've got 6 different robots that I've worked with in some different capacity. I've tried to sort of put it to scale as well. There you go, you can see as well. So I have played and worked with a Pepper as well. We've got a couple of other humanoids. They're a lot smaller, like on the table there. They'd normally be about like that. A couple of animal-like robots and a few more perhaps mechanical-looking robots as well. And we'll get into why they're all so different, what does that mean, and what can they do, and how that all connects. So some of the questions we've been looking at overall, what is a social robot? What does it look like? What does it do? The part I'm specifically interested in as a psychologist is how do people actually respond? They interact with the robots. What do they believe that these robots to be? What do they believe the robots can do? And perhaps most importantly in my work that I'm interested in is how do they feel? What are our emotive, our bonds with these robots? What are the connections that we build? And it is very important to consider what the context that we'd have, what sort of situations where it would be used in, and what would they be expected to do, what tasks would they have in those roles. So first up, I'm just going to highlight these two here. So we have the KUKA arm robot, the orange tool-looking one, and that's a robot used a lot in like manufacturing processes such as like car assembly and so on. You can attach various like hands or gizmos on the end. And the red robot down here is the Pioneer robot. Its main functionality is it can just rove around autonomously. And I think I'm going to have to disagree with Scott a little bit where he's talking about is defining a social robot. They mostly were over on the right side for Scott there, about that they're being person-like, they have social behaviors. For me, I think a social robot is one that evokes social behaviors in us. So some of the work that we've done has been, including with the KUKA arm, we had a collaborative manufacturing task where people had to work with the robot to assemble a small sort of machinery part. We found people were much better at working with the robot if we gave them some basic rules that were in the theme of like turn-taking and cooperation and sharing. And people work better with the robot on that regard, but they also started to describe robots in more positive light. They described the robot as being more trustworthy, and they enjoyed working with the robot more. Similarly, with the box-looking robot that some people have described as a bad Henry Hoover, is a we've set it up as a tour guide robot that navigates around a fairly complex building at the university. This building is complex enough that sometimes the robot can get lost in its one job of wayfinding and directing people where they need to go. But we found if we put in some speech bank phrases, that it's just pre-programmed phrases every now and then, people really warmed towards the robot. And even if it got lost and made mistakes, as long as we had the robot apologize for making the mistakes and justify where it had gone wrong and what it would do, though people regarded the robot as being less capable and ultimately quite a bad tool, they wanted to use the robot more. They actually liked working with it more because it was obeying the social rules that we would expect. Now, this robot gives no indication of any social rules that we would expect from it just by appearance, but just we are so quite often welcoming and inviting to put elements of people or elements of personalities in objects, in computers, in any sort of system that we can experience, that we don't seem to mind its appearance. I'll just move over, we've got a couple more of our robots. We can see we've got a clear difference in the types of robots we have here. We have the Paro robot, the furry baby harp seal-looking robot, and the Miro, which is a generic mammal. A lot of people call it a dog, a few people call it a rabbit. It's got features of a cow as well, apparently, but I don't know. That one's actually built by staff at the University of Sheffield, and we're quite proud of the new capabilities that it will have. It's effectively a robotic pet, but an educational tool as well. The Paro robot's used in animal care therapies as a substitute for animals. It's often used in places such as old folks' homes where they can have bring animals that people can care for a little while. Obviously, there are ethical concerns of having animals themselves, so robots may be able to fill that gap. And we find very, very quickly that people will pick up these animal-like robots. They will treat them as domesticated creatures straight away. There is no instructions given to people. They're just warm to them straight away. They will talk to the robots in much the way that we might talk with an animal. They don't expect a conversation back because, well, these are just simply animal-like creatures. Of the remaining robots, though, I want to mostly talk about Zeno. This is my robot that we've worked with for a good couple of years now, looking at interactions with children. This is a robot built by RoboKind in America, in Texas, I think, and it's developed largely for working with children that are on the ASD spectrum or have autism. It's encouraging children to engage in social interactions. And that's not specifically the area that I've been looking at. I've just been looking at how children understand what this robot is and what it might do. So we have built it as a educational tutor. We put in like some games about like healthy living, but we just create lots of fun games for kids to interact with and play with. Unfortunately, I can't show any videos because they're all bound by like research confidentiality and they've got kids in, so I can't show you the kids playing with the robots. But we have a setup where we have Simon Says situation where there's robots giving the kids instructions, they do the task or not, and then the robot feeds back accordingly. And we ask kids, well, what was it like playing with a robot on our scale of 1 to 10? And every kid gives like a 10 out of 10. Yeah, this is the best toy ever. I want one for Christmas. Mum, can you buy me one? I want a robot. I want a robot. And we don't really know what the kids mean by this at all. Are they really enthusiastic? Is this something that they really, really do want? Or are they perhaps being polite? They think we built the robot and they just want to say, oh, yeah, it was a good job. Well done. So we do a lot of behavioral analysis. We study the movements of the children. We study their positions in relation to the robots, how they look towards others, how they look towards their family that might be present. And we follow as well monitoring their emotional expressions. So we can measure second by second their emotional expressions and show how they're actually perhaps showing what they may be feeling while they're interacting with the robot. And we can compare this against their scores at the end in terms of their surveys and what they want to say about the robot. And we get a good general idea of how children actually engage with the robot. One of the main findings or consistent findings that we've had across these studies is that boys respond incredibly well to the expressive states of the Zeno robot. The robot itself, unlike all the others, has motors around in the face and a flexible rubber-type skin. And it can generate basic sort of expressions as well. We found the more expressive, the more emotive and evocative the robot is, the better, more positively the boys seem to respond to it. Girls, on the other hand, tended to sort of keep a fairly even response to the robot regardless of how expressive or neutral it was. Now, they liked playing with the robot, they enjoyed the tech as well, but it was just this unusual or unexpected emergent finding that we found throughout. We have some ideas in terms of children understanding about the robot being a living thing that they want to play with, but we've worked into that further. One of the other findings that we've had is related to age. So older children tend to review the robot as being somewhere between like a mechanical and a living object, but younger children, children around age 6 or so, really strongly regard this object as being very much like a person. But again, this is just asking them straight questions on this matter. We don't really know what they're actually processing inside. So we found a way to try and get deeper into this, the children's understanding of the robot, and we give them opportunity. If you could ask a robot anything you want at all, what would you ask? And kids come up with really important questions for them. So we have questions like, does Santa give you presents? What's your favorite color? These are important things for kids. How do you have a bath? Do you have a pet? Do you go to the doctors to get your wires checked? When were you made? Does it like being programmed without a say in what it does? That kid seems pretty smart. Were you programmed on JavaScript, Scratch, or Python? Why are you a boy and not a girl? And if we get a chance later on, I'd love to really dig into that one. That's a fascinating one. When is your birthday? Do you have a sister? And last, can you upgrade yourself to Windows 10? And what we find in these questions, I've color-coded them there, but they also run on a sort of themes from right to left, if that's a matter there. So the 5 that we have on the right there, they are questions that we would quite comfortably talk with anyone about, perhaps people from about a bit of a different background maybe, but these are questions we would ask people. If the questions that on the left under the picture of Zeno there, they are extremely mechanical or process-based questions. And the purple ones, the 3 in the middle there, they're also really mechanical-based questions, but they have this strange, personable nature to them. And what we find is that the younger children tend to ask the questions over on the right, and as they get older, they sort of drift through towards asking more questions on the left. And it's this middle ground that's absolutely fascinating, because we have this liminal nature of being this robot, machine, and person, or a person, machine, and it's really, really strange. What I like most about this is that this occurs round about the time that children are really understanding their own identity, understanding what it means to be a person, why people are different from each other, and how people are similar to each other. And if we're introducing robots right into the mix when that's happening, especially advanced social robots and so on, and we're expecting, like the companies that build these say they're going to be in every kid's home. We think like computers in the 70s sort of era that we're in now for robots. Well, down the line, everyone has a computer everywhere. Maybe robots might be similar in this regard. If we're having these robots everywhere, is that going to start in any way shaping how children view persons? Are they more open to the idea of robot persons and so on? To just tie this into loneliness specifically, the idea that we'll be having all these robots around as potential companions for children, potential companions for other people as well. It's really interesting to see how quickly people are welcome to put in this idea of personality. You've seen Pepper moving around and things. You can let yourself get carried away a little bit every now and then with, oh yeah, look, isn't he funny? Isn't she funny? Well, wait a minute, it's a robot. With kids with the robots, with people with the robots, as soon as they come to play with them, there is this sort of light of like, oh yeah, there's something in there. I don't know what it is yet, but there is something. And this is quite fun because a colleague of mine, Dr. Julia Pereiro, she's been studying loneliness and daydreaming. And it turns out that we can reduce our own experienced state of loneliness through daydreaming or imagining about other people. And here we might be imagining about other people, but with this robot as a vessel for that idea. We may be able to reduce loneliness just through these robots by creating our own companionship of sorts. Now, I don't know the ethics on that, I don't know the morals of that, but it sounds like this very unusual, interesting idea to perhaps lead on with. I think we'll end there.
Thank you. Okay, so you've heard from all 4 members of our panel now, so we're going to open up to some conversation from the audience. If you don't want to ask a question with the microphone, feel free to tweet us a question with the hashtag robots versus loneliness. It's a bit dark on the screen, but just use the hashtag and we'll pick up your question, and we'll start a conversation now and pick up some of the comments from our amazing panel. Before we go into the discussion, can you just join me in giving a round of applause again to our panel for their contributions? So, as chair, I'm going to steal the first question. I'm going to give a nice broad one to sort of open the debate quite wide. Sherry Turkle is an anthropologist that's done a lot of work with robots and how people perceive different kind of social robots. And Sherry Turkle's really, really concerned that these robots are going to dehumanize us. They're going to somehow bring about the end of our humanity. And I just want to start with that idea of humanness to the panel. What is the risk with these social robots in relation to our humanness and how they might dehumanize us? Hopefully the microphones on your desk should work, so if you want to share those among yourselves.
Much better.
Who wants to go?
I'll have a go. In my view, we are years away from that kind of scenario. I think it is up to us, and that's why we need to be debating and to be thinking about the purpose of the robots and how they should be helping us. In terms of the project that I am involved with, we do not see the robot replacing a carer. We see the robot as a complement to the carer, as almost as a tool to be used so that, care becomes more available. We're very careful about the issue of or of reassuring that the robot isn't going to take over. And we are going along the path in a very careful and ethical way, and we have a full-time ethicist on our team.
We want to go left, sorry. So I have a couple of problems with Sherry Turkle's work. One in particular is that I think she overestimates the quality of human interactions in certain circumstances. So she will talk about how we should interact with humans at the coffee shop when they serve us. Well, that ignores the fact that a lot of those interactions are automated by the efficiency expectations of places like Starbucks and Costa and wherever. We tried to kind of demonstrate that in the film. If you notice, the delivery guy gives a really perfunctory, some people have asked if he's actually a robot, but he's not meant to be a robot at all, but he gives the kind of perfunctory service that a lot of people are reduced to when our capitalistic intentions for service really come through. So some of her assumptions about shifting away from robots and interacting with humans ignores that we're turning a lot of humans into robots in the way that we expect them to work and to treat other humans. So I think that's worth bearing attention to as well.
Okay.
Okay, I think it's kind of an interesting question. This might be a bit glib of me, but I think it's already happened that back in, I think, '96, the book The Media Equation came out, which basically highlights that we're not very well adapted to understanding things like these social robots, understanding these matters, but it was talking about computers and how people treated computers as persons, how people treated like media situations as events and locations that they could be physically part of. I don't foresee that the dehumanization is likely to occur much further, given that these robots are simply embodied. I think any risks that we've already experienced, we've very passively experienced and not really concerned ourselves with.
When a technology comes into the fore, I think it's interesting to see that we don't really know what's going to happen with them a lot of the time. In terms of, using phones and texting each other versus speaking in person, and also versus people texting each other in the same room these days, because it's like a different method of communication, and it's an adaptive one, and some people will want to talk more and other people won't want to talk, and there's those differences between people. Not everybody's going to submit to the apocalypse. There'll still be people that want to have other preferences. But I think what's interesting to think about with sex robots is that the same way that you're saying, well, for the example of like robots being able to use machine learning to do things better than humans, if you get a complete experience in a partner where it combines like a mental health AI chatbot, it provides you with emotional support and reactions to things that are appropriate, it's kind of weird. You might imagine a world where your robot partner could make you become a better person by just like how it's encoded, and not being ever in a bad mood, and being able to just respond like relatively calmly, or just as emotionally as it thinks that you need to hear right now. So it's like maybe we'd become better in our partnership with a robot when we go out into the world and actually talk with other human beings. It's kind of, we don't know how it would go. And if a lot of people would adopt that, and people want to go and suffer and try and do old-fashioned human relationship again, even though it sucks, but that's just what we know, and we're going to do it.
So there's a kind of a lot of openness for the future with social robots, and we really are, as you said earlier on, James, we're kind of at that liminal stage at the moment where things are kind of open for discussion. Does anyone have any other questions for the panel based on? I've got a few over here. I'm going to hand you over the microphone. I'll come to you first.
I speak as an owner of a smartphone, and the damn thing with all its algorithms has gradually seduced me over the last 18 months, 2 years, to the extent that nowadays it's the only bit of electronics that I would never be without, which is frightening in a sense, because if you then get computers that become lifelike and can go a step further and can almost convince you to love them, I don't know where we're going, because I think that a lot of people will fall into that trap, and then they will lose the ability to communicate with human beings who, by definition, are far more difficult to deal with on a general basis because they have different personalities, etc., and will not adapt to you. So you have to adapt to them. Has the panel got any comments on that? Yeah. I thought you might.
What's fascinating is that you might consider, if you reach that stage where that technology is embodied in that way, who controls the code behind how your robot's going to respond to you, and how much do you want your robot to disagree with you if you realize that if it's just being placid and doing everything you want, that's your concern, right? If you're just going to become a strange...
The trouble is, if it doesn't do what you want, you might not like it.
You're not going to engage with it.
And then you're going to send it back.
And then, who did you buy it from? And who've you paid to incorporate those qualities? And then when do you give up and you go, actually, I don't want to deal with it, saying, no, I'm going to go in and change the settings today?
Well, sorry, I'll shut up in a minute. See, I think this is we're on the threshold of the technology of the internet in the 1990s, when no one really understood what it was going to do, what it wasn't going to do. We all now know what it can do, and we all know what it can't do. And I think that's exactly what's going to happen with information technology, courtesy of our little friend here, in the next 20 years. Would you agree? Sorry.
I want to use an analogy with the film The Matrix. We were talking about this earlier, and I think I try to avoid spoilers, but I think I'm safe with The Matrix. We were joking about this earlier. But in The Matrix, the artificial intelligence that dominates the humans puts them into a virtual reality, basically. But the first versions are perfect. They're utopian. And all of our minds rebel because we don't believe that we accept that. And actually, the version of The Matrix you see in the films is the kind of drudgery of actually pretty much our day-to-day experience that we have now. It's a nice replication of what we're up to. And that's what I was trying to get at in the question that we raised in Friend of the Machine. Is a perfect friend and an imperfect friend? Actually, perfection doesn't satisfy us, and we seek imperfection. In the parts where our friendships mesh badly together. And I've had some terrible friends, and I don't talk to some of them anymore, but I've had some friends where our conversations haven't gone smoothly, but that's actually the interesting thing about having that friendship, where we don't see things exactly the same, we don't behave in exactly the same ways. So I think there may be stages of where if we had artificial friends who were around us all the time, who were too perfect, we wouldn't actually enjoy that. Then arguably you could say that the technology would be advanced enough or be pushed forward enough to then be imperfect enough to please us. But that's a kind of difficult grey space that I don't really know about. So I'm not too worried. In the same way that you love your iPhone, but you've come out this evening and you're speaking with people, you're not spending 24/7 with your iPhone. I think there's still, and the internet as well, I like aspects of the internet. I don't spend my entire life on it, a lot of it, but not my entire life. I think there's still the possibility for varieties of experience, and I'm not too pessimistic about it dominating everyone's experience. There will be extremes at both ends, though.
I'm not pessimistic, I'm very optimistic. But I'm sure this kind of thing can be sorted. But as we should have learned from the 1990s, that you've got to tackle all this fairly early, rather than leave it and let the market forces play their role. We all know what happens then.
Well, we're still trying to struggle with the outcomes of the printed press, so I think we're quite slow at catching up with technology.
Okay, we'll move on for another question. Did you have your hand up as well? Yes.
It's a bit of an extension of what we said, because I think we've had robots that have worked with young people with autism and have supported them. So there's something about not having robots as a substitute for human interaction, but there to promote it so people can further engage, so to support people out of loneliness. So is there any research on that?
I guess I'll pitch this. Yes, so I think I spotted in your video Kirsten Daltonhan.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Kirsten from the University of Hertfordshire has done a lot of work with robots as a supportive tool for children with ASD, autism, and so forth. It's included work that is like mirroring the robot's behaviors, mirroring the robot's expressions, sort of recognizing the other there. But a lot of her work has also included, and some of the work in Sheffield Robotics as well. My friend Natalie Wood has done some work with robots as being a facilitator of interactions. So she's used the Paro robot, placed it between two people that have never met before, and just got people to both interact with the robot and both discuss and engage with it. And she's compared that against other like interactive toys and games and so forth. And it seems the robot itself was very much more effective at encouraging the interactions between people. And I think Kirsten Daltonhan's done some similar work looking at this. And I think it's a useful tool. It might not have profound or broad effects, but I think we're at a very early stage that's quite promising.
Irena, what about aging populations when they develop conditions like dementia and the ethics behind what people understand the robot is and what it's doing?
Actually, the project that I'm involved with is not about dementia, but I have visited institutions and care homes where they're using Paro, for example, it is obvious when you watch the older people with Paro on their knees and they're stroking it, and it is relaxing. It is, and when you are relaxed, and there is a lot of research that has been done with Paro in particular, and demented people and people with dementia, and the results are quite positive. So I'm very optimistic that humans will never give up other humans, that we will hopefully use the robots, and we'll have robots in our lives and interact with them, and just like we interact with Alexa or whatever. But that is just an additional mode of interaction and so forth. I think hopefully we, as my fellow presenters here have said, that hopefully it will make us better human beings, and it will encourage us to be relating and communicating with other humans more than we maybe do. So I think there's a lot of optimism in my view.
So one of the things I think we're getting from the panel is this idea of replacement is kind of maybe where a lot of the roots of the issues are. If we think about augmentation and enhancement and participation in relationships rather than replacement, that's where we can kind of shift away from some of those fear narratives. Did I see some hands up? I'll come and give you the microphone.
Except that it seems like men are extremely interested in full replacement, from what the research around sex robots says, which is scary. So. Do you want to say a little bit about that? No, we'll let them think about it.
I mean, just on the last discussion, of course there's grounds for optimism because it's clear that social robots could be very helpful. But I think it's also, we can't just wish that it's all going to work out. I mean, the history of humankind is if there's something nefarious that can be done, it will be done. And so I'm wondering if we think about the dystopian uses of social robots. I mean, when you go into the world of sex, I mean, can underage kids have sex with robots? My colleague was telling me the other day about a situation where a lonely elderly person asked the robot to help her commit assisted suicide. So we can kind of go on with a list of potential things we wouldn't want to have happen. So I guess what I'm wondering for the panel is, can we anticipate these issues? And is there a way to in a way regulate or have some codes or have some policy, so some things are just off the cards, right? And then that will kind of hopefully create the space for the good things associated with robots. I know it's a learning process. We can't anticipate everything, but we can anticipate some of these things. So I'm wondering, maybe what would be the worst things? What would be your top worst thing that a social robot could do, and how could we make sure it doesn't do it?
Excellent question. Who wants to jump in on that first?
If I could just say a few words. I mean, a lot of the research that is done at the moment is funded by the European Union and governments. And I know that in particular in the European Union, there is a lot of emphasis about ethics. And we are required to address ethics, and we are required to be ethical. There are ethical codes that have been developed and that are being developed even further. And as I said, we actually have an ethicist on our team. So the funders of the research influence policy, and hopefully the public will also, as you know, more of this kind of debates are reported, so that policy is influenced and the right, well, whatever the right is, but the decisions are taken sensibly, and although technology is not doesn't wait, we have to catch up with it, but we have to ensure that we have the right rules and regulations and codes of practices, so those things don't happen. But it's not the robots that are bad, it's people who are bad. And it is, you know, we have to look at it from that point of view.
Yeah, in some ways, if we focus more on the humans, actually it's relatively simple because, as you say, it's not the robots doing a thing wrong. So we don't have to come up with an entirely new category of law to prescribe what robots should and shouldn't do. It should be using laws we already have to regulate what humans should and shouldn't do. So, for example, the laptop, it's perfectly legal for me to go online. If I start downloading child porn, we have laws and regulations in place to deal with that. Therefore, why can't we extend that to other manifestations of that form of pornography? It becomes more complicated when our human perceptions of robots lend to them minds that they don't have. So there's already discussion about robot rights, when technologically speaking, that's an irrelevancy. But it's because we already presume on their behalf that they want them. So a colleague of mine was at a public talk, and a young girl got very upset because she believes that Sophia, the Hanson robot, who was in the film briefly, that she wants rights and we should give them to her. So we have to, what we need to do is have a very kind of clear education on what is and isn't possible with robots at this stage. And there's lots of people doing it, obviously, to kind of push back against some of that anthropomorphism that we're very prone to doing, but it can cause uncertainty and fear. A lot of my work is looking at robot apocalypses, and that comes from the same sorts of sources. But when it comes to regulation, if we know what we're dealing with, if it's technology, then we have existing parallels we can draw on.
Yeah, that kind of raises the more grand idea of whether we should even be creating humanoid robots. And if there was a sex robot, could it not just be an amorphous machine? Maybe it would communicate with you in another way that isn't even human language, so you don't get the intonations and expectations that it has a certain theory of mind or whatever. So, yeah, I don't know. For me, that's actually really interesting because it kind of lends to science fiction where you see androids that have to have certain ways about them, so you know when you see that's an android, it's got like the glowing ring on its head rather than the human part. But yeah, there's still the potential for people to project as much as they want on it.
Goodness, yeah. It's just to, I guess, round off on the projection stuff. It's one of the easiest ways I think we found when we've been programming any of the robots to get people to treat it like a person is to have the robot refer to itself as I. And depending on your theories of personhood and what that means, I understand there's some schools of personhood are other people, as long as other people regard you as a person, you are considered a person. If we have a robot referring to itself as I, it's granted itself personhood, and as a result, has the capability to grant personhood. It creates a very strange loop that just seems to sort of, I don't know, short-circuit something in our minds, and we just, oh yeah, the robot knows itself. And all it is just a simple phrase spoken. The robot has no understanding or concept of this. Most of the robots that I've shown there have no understanding of their own physicality, and if they can bash themselves and try and push through themselves, they will. There is no I there, but just simply stating it leads us to believe it. I think with your question about what the worst a robot can do, we've talked about it's people, really. I think the worst thing a robot can do is to be indifferent in that. So we look at all the concerns regarding automation, the loss of jobs, and so on. If a person's replaced by a robot, well, the robot's indifferent in this matter. It's effectively complicit in that person having lost a job. Now, in the current society that we live in, that person now has no money. But they didn't do anything wrong there, and the robot may be more efficient at working. It saves the company money. Could the company not just pay that person now a pension, having been replaced by a robot? The robot problems are only going to simply arise from the structure of the society that we have already. And I think that's a bit of a bigger question than today.
Can I just follow up on the phrase, including eyes? You don't even need that. I mean, I looked at some of the responses to AlphaGo when it defeated Lee Sedol at the game of Go. And it's basically, it's a program on a server. It doesn't even have a robotic arm to play the moves. There's a human taking the instructions and playing the Go pieces. But the responses, a lot of them included things like fan art. So people were illustrating what they thought AlphaGo looks like. And obviously Go is an Asian game, so lots of representations where Asian, often children for some reason, perhaps because it was a relatively new computer program, the AI system. They thought it'd be young. Some were more abstract, but they were humanoid, and that didn't require anything like AlphaGo saying, I enjoy playing Go now. Yeah. It didn't require AlphaGo to be anything other than something that was quite interesting. So we fill in the gaps quite easily as humans. We fill in the gaps with our tendency to anthropomorphize, and that's quite difficult to push back against.
I definitely think so. It sounds like anthropomorphism is our friend as much as our foe when it comes to social robots. It's what makes us want to interact with these things, but it also is what makes us kind of nervous and unsure about the effects of that. So I think that's really, really important to get up from the panel there. We've got time for maybe 1 or 2 more questions. Yes, I'll come and give you the microphone.
Thank you. Basically, my question goes back to the loneliness and the technology that we have today and what's being used by young people, elderly people, what we're all trying to use. There's kind of no doubt that it's increasing loneliness, and that's like a very strong statement to make, I know. But the rise of ADHD and depression and anxiety we see in young people today, a lot of research is being done to say that's due to social media, that's due to the technology that we have now. And if the question is, can robots make us less lonely? What's different about robots to the technology that we're currently using? Because if the technology we're currently using is making the population more lonely, more anxious, more depressed, why are robots different? Why are these going to make us less lonely and improve our mental health?
Any takers for that one?
Let's go on that one. I mean, I know there is research stating that loneliness is greater. And connecting it to things like technology, social media, ADHD. But there's also more conversation around those things as well. So the very platforms that are being accused of enhancing loneliness are the places where people can express their loneliness and also can express and find other people who have ADHD or autism or various different behavioral differences, that actually the increased discourse is another way in which these things are diagnosed more. So we didn't have, you go way, way, way back, would anyone have spoken about their feelings of loneliness in quite the way that we do now? So I take your point, but I think there's also a point to be made about just simple awareness and greater awareness of other things that are happening in our society that cause anxiety, and having more streams of information is also an aspect of that. So I don't entirely agree with the setup of your premise, but I think what might be different is in the ways of interaction. So again, I disagree with Sherry Turkle that social media platforms make us lonely because we're not interacting with humans, but actually there are humans on the other side of those screens. Whereas with robots, there aren't humans on the other side of the screens, the robots are the robots. So I suppose at that sense there is a note of caution in the fact that her statement of together alone, the image she always has on her posters of a couple of kids on their phones, is actually not talking to each other. They're actually talking to about 12 different people who aren't physically there, whereas you're just talking to a robot that's not connecting you to humans in any way. So there might be a difference in kind there.
And a difference in the potential quality of the interactions. In terms of, it could be either way. It could be that you don't get as much from 12 people that aren't fully paying attention to you, and maybe a robot who's fully involved and invested in you because you bought it and paid someone to code it to care for you. Then I don't know. We'll see.
We've got time for one last question. I'll come to you.
Thank you. So just building on that question, if we replace the word loneliness with solitude, what about the value of solitude, but also the increasing turn towards solitude in light of all of this technology? So, for example, the rise in the dumb phones. So people purposely buying phones now where people can't text them, they can't email them. So I just wondered if perhaps we could reflect a little bit on that.
I think part of, I'm just going to do my bit, and it's probably even not what you want to hear, but I feel like I really want to say it. And then you guys can answer the real question. But in terms of dumb phone, I feel like another part of that is that people understanding how much information they're putting into into the system, and just commercial interest in your data. I feel like that's a really interesting problem that we'll face with social robots. The more and more they engage with us, if you're having an intimate relationship with a sex robot, it's going to gather so much more of your behavioral information and stuff like that than you've been able to just tap on a screen. So it'll know everything. It's just more and more, and who knows where that data goes. We've had Cambridge Analytica and all those various issues that tend to push people to be offline and disconnect. So I don't know, that's not even the right thing, but I just wanted to say it. Just awareness of your data is a good thing to have.
So I find this idea of sort of digital disconnect, digital detox, digital Sabbath is another one that's come up as well, very interesting. For two reasons. So one reason I find it very interesting is that I only know about those things because people then talk about them on social media. So I'm off on a digital detox for a month. I'm back. So that there's that sort of counterpoint of it's probably mentally healthy, but it's also part of a demonstration of who I am. This is me, and that's what we do on social media a lot.
If you'd like to join me again for thanking the panel for their contributions and for your questions as well, it's been a fun